My name is Evelyn Maddox. I was 35 when I stood under the gray sky of Eagle Creek, wearing a uniform that didn't bear a single rank, surrounded by strangers who had no idea who I used to be. They called it Day 1 of Bootcamp. For me, it was Chapter 2. The gravel crunched sharp beneath my boots as we fell into formation. Across the courtyard, a raised platform waited, and on it stood my father, Colonel Warren Maddox, his whistle gleaming in the morning light, his voice already slicing through the air. When he reached my name on the roster, he paused. Then, loud enough for the entire base to hear, he said, "Should have left this one off the list. Waste of space, unfit for the field." Laughter, just a ripple, but loud enough. A few heads turned, no one flinched, not even me. I didn't blink, didn't correct him, didn't move, because I didn't come here for respect. I came for exposure. And he had just handed it to me. Right there before the first drill, before the first test, he confirmed exactly why I came back under a name no one remembered, to finish what he tried so hard to erase. They assigned me to Unit Bravo, the place where they put the slow, the sloppy, and the forgotten. The gear didn't fit. The rifles misfired. One of the helmets still had a crack down the side from a fall no one logged. It was perfect. No one looked twice when I arrived. My name tag read E. Maddox, but no one connected it to the man barking orders across the yard. That was how I planned it. No history, no rank. Just another latecomer trying to blend in. Inside the barracks, everything smelled like metal and mildew. My cot was wedged between a kid who couldn't stop twitching in his sleep and another who recited training manuals under his breath. I unpacked slowly, one movement at a time, letting the silence grow heavy around me. On the second day, I noticed the paperwork. Everyone got the same folder. Background checks, health history, basic psych evals. Mine was thinner than it should have been. Just a single sheet of clearance approval, marked expedited. No training record, no former assignment, no questions asked. Someone had made sure I slipped through untouched. Good. That meant Foster had kept his promise. Lieutenant General Isaac Foster was the only one who knew who I really was. He had once served under the same command as Falco, the man who trained me, believed in me, and died in the same explosion that supposedly killed me too. 7 years ago, that file, the one that erased my name, came from a desk just down the hall from my father's. No investigation, no body, just a red stamp, presumed KIA, case closed. But I wasn't dead, I had simply disappeared. Now I was back, and the only thing more powerful than being forgotten was being underestimated. Each morning I followed the drills. I kept my pace slow, my responses dull. I let the instructors label me non-threatening. That was the trick. You can't hide a storm behind thunder. You hide it behind silence. Fisher, a wiry recruit, with too much mouth and not enough sense, started calling me Admin Ghost. Said I moved like I was here to file complaints, not fire rounds. I smiled once. He never said it again. By the end of week 1, I had mapped the schedule, identified 3 senior trainers connected to Project Signal Black Echo's successor, and pinpointed which supply officer had access to restricted surveillance footage. And I'd done it all without drawing a single report. At night, I'd sit by the far window of the barracks notebook, open pen quiet. No one paid attention. They thought I was journaling, maybe grieving. But the truth was, I wasn't documenting my days. I was gathering evidence, because if I wanted to shut it all down, I needed to know exactly where the wires ran, and who was still holding the switch. It happened on the 12th day, mid-afternoon, cloudless sky air, hot enough to sting your throat. Combat simulation. They paired us off in the gravel pit behind the motor pool. No mats, no headgear, just gloves and grit. I was matched with Fisher. He cracked his knuckles like a showman, grinning with all the arrogance of someone who'd never been hit properly. "Try not to sprain anything, Ghost," he said. "Wouldn't want paperwork." I said nothing, just raised my hands and waited. He came at me, wild elbows, sharp knees flashing. His technique was chaos, all speed and no anchor. I let him swing, let him think he was in control. Then I pivoted, dropped low, and swept him off his feet with a maneuver they don't teach in basic. He hit the ground hard. The air knocked out of him in a single surprised grunt, but it wasn't the fall that silenced the crowd. It was what came next. As he collapsed, his hand caught the back of my collar, yanked it sideways, and there it was. The ink, stretched across my upper back, black and stark under the afternoon sun. A sigil not seen in years. The mark of Ghost Echo. The crowd stilled. Instructors stopped shouting. One of them dropped his clipboard. But the real shift came from the edge of the ring, where General Foster had been watching, silently, arms folded. He saw the tattoo, and he froze. His mouth parted slightly, eyes locked on mine. Then, with a deliberate stillness that only veterans understand, he stepped forward, removed his cap, and said, "We salute her." His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It cut clean through the silence like steel through fog. Every boot snapped to position. Even Fisher, flat on the dirt, scrambled to kneel. No one questioned it. Except one, my father. He had been observing from the upper walkway, flanked by two officers. His jaw clenched. His grip on the railing tightened. But he didn't speak. Didn't move. He just stared. And for the first time, he didn't look like a man in command. He looked like a man out of control. Foster joined him on the platform moments later. I didn't hear what he said, but I saw the way my father's shoulders stiffened, the way his hands curled just slightly, like someone trying to hold on to something that was already slipping away. They didn't ask me what the tattoo meant. They didn't have to, because that symbol wasn't about rank or vanity. It was about survival. It was a marker of a mission buried under 7 layers of denial. And now it was in plain view, undeniable, unforgotten. That wasn't the moment everything changed. That was the moment they realized they no longer controlled the narrative. After the tattoo incident, no one spoke to me differently. No salute, no questions. But they looked longer, blinked more often, hesitated before barking commands, and that was more telling than any words. Foster didn't approach me in public. That wasn't his way. But 2 nights later, as I sat in the mess hall late nursing instant coffee, no one really drank. He slid a small drive across my tray. "Training footage," he said quietly, not even sitting. "Unofficial. No trace." "You have 1 hour." He left before I could respond. Back in the barracks, I locked the door and plugged the drive into my offline terminal. The screen flickered to life, grainy footage loading second by second. No sound, just timestamp overlays and wide-angle views of rooms labeled as Tier 4 drills. Except they weren't drills. They were conditioning. Recruits blindfolded in metal crates. Simulated betrayal scenarios. Forced isolation until emotional breakdown. And one line written on the wall of the simulation chamber, printed in white paint. "If you're not ready to be forgotten, you're not ready to be used." I stared at that line for a long time. Falco, my old commander, used to say, "We train soldiers, not tools." This was something else. This was manipulation turned into doctrine. And I'd seen it before, back when Black Echo was quietly transitioning into something darker. Before the explosion. Before my name disappeared. This wasn't just about control anymore. It was about obedience at the cost of self. I shut the terminal down, wiped the system, burned the drive. The next morning, I filed a request under the policy code for inter-unit transfer behavior metrics, citing morale disparities in Bravo platoon. It looked harmless, boring even. That was the point. It allowed me access to the internal rosters and performance logs. I started making notes, names of instructors, timestamps of repeat isolation drills, discrepancies between reported outcomes, and footage I had seen. And then came the note. Slid under my door sometime before dawn. No signature, just one line printed neatly. "Policy won't save them, and it won't save you either." I stared at it for nearly a minute. Not out of fear, out of clarity, because they knew I was watching. And that meant I was finally close. They had tried to erase me once, quietly and clean. Now I was standing in the center of their blueprint, peeling back the layers. They weren't just trying to shape a new generation of soldiers. They were trying to build ghosts. But this time, the ghost was awake and writing everything down. I saw him again 3 days later, walking the perimeter near the advanced drills course, clipboard in hand, barking orders like the cadence came from his bones. Colonel Warren Maddox, my father, my former commanding officer, and the man who'd written my first erasure in black ink. He didn't flinch when he saw me, didn't pause. Just glanced once the way someone might look at a broken radio, silent, unbothered, irrelevant. "Paper pushers don't last out here," he said without looking. "Don't slow us down." Then he turned and walked away. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. That was his signature move. Pretend you never existed. Pretend it never mattered. 12 years ago, I was pulled from Project Obsidian without warning. I had passed every psychological screening, outscored 3 senior officers in tactical simulations. Falco himself had said I was the best operative he'd trained since the Gulf. But then the memo arrived. Psychologically unfit for final clearance. No hearing, no appeal, just one signature. His. He'd told people later it was a precaution. That I wasn't stable enough to lead. That I lacked judgment. That I cracked under pressure. But the truth was simpler. Falco chose me, not him. And Warren Maddox couldn't live with that. He'd spent decades building his image-decorated veteran expert tactician feared and respected by peers. But when the program chose someone else, his daughter, he rewrote the rules. He buried me with a single report. And now, here we were again. Only this time, I wasn't fighting for approval. I was here to dismantle the lie. I began to watch him not as a daughter, not even as a rival, but as a strategist. Every correction he gave a trainee was needlessly harsh. Every failed test was delivered with finality, never feedback. And during one exercise called Loss Protocol, meant to test leadership under pressure, he destroyed a young lieutenant in front of the entire squad for hesitating mid-mission. He tore the man's personnel file in half, called him a cautionary tale, said he'd never wear a command stripe again. I documented everything, quietly, without comment. I didn't want him removed, not yet. I wanted him visible, because I knew his kind. Men who survive by cutting others down, convinced their own shadow is the tallest thing in the room, but legacies built on silence don't survive exposure. They burn. That night, I sent an internal flag, not a formal complaint, not a personal attack. Just a pattern recognition notice logged into the observation system. Behavioral concerns, instructional inconsistency, no names. Yet. Because this wasn't about vengeance. This was about letting others start to see what I had known all along. That the legend of Colonel Maddox was only paper. And this time, I was the one holding the match. It came in a beige folder, hand-delivered by a logistics aide, with too many freckles and too little context. Was told it was misrouted. He mumbled, scratching his neck. Had your name on the list. So, here you go. I thanked him, closed the door, and sat down at the steel desk under the flickering overhead light. The folder wasn't thick, but it was heavy. Inside were documents marked internal candidate assignment sealed orders for a new off-site tactical cohort. An elite unit under classified clearance. The kind of training that only ghosts were ever offered. And there it was. My name, Evelyn Maddox. Evaluated, nominated, approved. But stapled to the back was a single sheet, handwritten, pressed hard enough to dent the paper. Denied. Psychologically unfit. Returned to sender. Signed Colonel W. Maddox. My father. I stared at the signature for a long time. The same hand that had cut me from obsidian now buried me again, this time under the same lie in a different font. The knock came soft, almost hesitant. I opened the door to find Fisher standing there. No grin, no swagger, just a folded sheet of paper in his hand. You weren't supposed to get that, he said. I said nothing. How long have you been here? I asked instead. Long enough, he replied. He didn't smirk this time, didn't mock, just looked at me with the kind of clarity only disillusionment gives. He nodded once and left without another word. From that day on, he didn't interrupt me in drills. He relayed intel during simulations without being asked. He started tracking things, patterns, names, timing, of altered test results. He wasn't my ally, not yet. But he was no longer just another recruit. He was paying attention. I slipped the folder beneath my bunk between the old foam and rusted frame. I didn't confront my father, not yet. Because men like him, men who rewrite people's futures with a pen, don't fear confrontation. They fear exposure. They fear the silence that follows a truth they can't refute. Later that night, I pulled out the old notebook Foster had given me during the briefing. Inside were pages of handwritten notes, cross-referenced logs, trainee names, coded designations I'd been reconstructing from memory. And now, a new entry proof of tampering signed in ink twice in 12 years. I wrote it all down not for backup, but for record. Because systems don't collapse from noise. They collapse from the weight of their own paper trail. And now I had mine. Next came the match. The graduation grounds smelled like gravel and sweat. Rows of recruits stood straight-backed under the morning sun, shoulder-squared boots aligned in rows like punctuation marks. I stood in the last row. No ribbons, no insignia. Just a standard issue jacket over a body they didn't recognize, and a name they had long buried. My father took the podium with the same stiffness he carried everywhere. His voice, crisp and trained, echoed across the courtyard. He read names, handed out commendations, spoke of honor and excellence. When it came time to close, he paused, just a beat too long. Then he said, "There's one file I was given, with no commendation attached, no record to review, no remarks to give." His eyes flicked toward me, barely then away. "It's blank, and I will treat it as such." He stepped back. No salute, no acknowledgement, just silence. That would have been the end, another public erasure tucked neatly into protocol, if not for the man who followed. General Foster stepped out from the side of the platform. He didn't stop at the microphone, didn't speak right away. He walked directly to the table, holding the training files, placed a red folder at its center, and opened it. Inside my photo, in full tactical gear, next to a line that read, "Status presumed KIA, Operation Ghost Echo." He looked up. "This is Evelyn Maddox," he said, voice calm but sharp. "She led 6 operatives into a mission no one else would touch. They didn't return. She did. The wind shifted. She was erased not because she failed, but because she was chosen by the wrong man, the one her father never forgave." My father took a step forward, but Foster didn't even glance his way. He raised his hand not to halt, but to command. "She outranks you," he said, "not in title but in truth." Then he saluted. It wasn't ceremonial, it was deliberate, it was earned. And slowly, one by one, others followed. First Megan the recruit, whose score was nearly buried. Then Fisher, who'd once laughed at me. Then instructors' trainees, even those who had mocked me silently, with every late supply drop and accidental locker reassignment. All of them. Until finally, my father raised his hand. Slow, bitter, hollow. Not in respect, but in surrender. I didn't return the gesture, because some silences speak louder than pride, and I had no need to respond to a salute that came a decade too late. I had already stood taller than the man who tried to keep me invisible, and now the field saw it too. I left the grounds that afternoon with no medal, no speech, no recorded farewell, only a scroll, sealed unsigned, handed to me quietly by Foster before dawn. Inside a formal closure order. Operation Obsidian officially dissolved. But I didn't need a ceremony to understand what that meant. Obsidian had never been about the files or the badges or the drills that turned men into machines. It had been about fear, control, the illusion of loyalty when silence was the real currency. And now it was over. I didn't return to command. I didn't ask for reinstatement. I chose a different direction. At the edge of a forgotten coastal town, inside a weather-worn hangar, with no flag and no gate, I opened something else. No signage, no anthem, just space. For those like me. The overlooked, the dismissed. The ones who were told not this time without explanation. The ones whose records were clean, but whose names were always missing. Veterans marked unstable. Immigrants told they didn't fit the mold. Women labeled too intense. Men discarded because they asked the wrong questions. Ghosts of programs that never admitted they existed. They came quietly. At first, one maybe 2 a week. Some looked broken. Others looked angry. Most just looked tired. I didn't train them the way I'd been trained. No shouting, no doctrine, just questions. Can you keep going when no one's watching? Can you trust your instincts when everything around you lies? Can you protect others even when no one protected you? They didn't always answer out loud. They didn't need to. Eventually, they stayed. And then they taught others. One night, weeks later, I found myself sitting on the floor beneath the old steel rafters, my back against a crate of rusted gear, the scroll from Foster resting in my lap. I unrolled it for the first time. At the bottom, beneath the formal language and the classified seals, was a single handwritten line. You weren't trained to lead. You became a leader by surviving. No name. But I knew the handwriting. Foster never needed credit, just closure. I folded the paper carefully and tucked it into the back of my notebook, behind Megan's testimony, behind Fisher's ghost file, behind every entry that once marked me presumed dead. Obsidian had ended. But the people it shaped hadn't. We were still here, and we were no longer asking for permission to be seen. The next morning, I opened the hangar early. Wind swept through the doorway, carrying salt and dust, and something else momentum. A new recruit stood at the entrance. Young, guarded, shoes worn thin. She looked at the space like she didn't know if she was allowed in. I didn't ask her name, just nodded. "Coffee's to the left," I said. "Training starts when you're ready." She stepped inside, didn't even hesitate.